All right, thank you, Vamia. And good night to everybody. Happy to see you. And I pray that tonight we will have a really engaging experience as we share. Hey, good to see my brother from Breath of Life. Glad to have you tonight joining us. Yes, so I'm hoping that as we go through this presentation tonight, that we would really be reminded and encouraged, because as we have heard through this series, there's no doubt that we're living in the last days, right? And unfortunately, sometimes we tend to take it for granted. Like, fine. I'll say this. There's some persons who think that focusing on current events and things that are happening in our world right now is not needed, all right? They sometimes refer to such people as alarmists. But I want to share with you, before I even get into the presentation, some reasons why we are supposed to steer clear of that mindset. Let me read from the book, a great book, Last Day Events. Let me read just 3 short statements here. And it says this: they, which mean God's people, they should know the things that will come to pass before the closing up of the world's history. These things concern our eternal welfare, and teachers and students should give more attention to them. Notice that statement: those who place themselves under God's control to be led and guided by him will catch the steady thread of events ordained by him to take place, right? The steady thread of events. And then this last one says, we are to see in history the fulfillment of prophecy, to study the workings of providence in the great reformatory movements, and to understand the progress of events in the marshaling of the nations for the final conflict of the great controversy. So the events that are taking place in the world points to the one certainty that the Bible prophecy in Revelation and Daniel are being fulfilled. And there's something called present truth, right? Present truth relates to fulfillment of prophecy that is occurring in our time. Of course, we know that Daniel 2 is a very important prophecy, and we've studied that, we know that. But when we think that that is all there is to know, then we could be very deceived, because the enemy is working double time now to cause us to become callous and not catch the thread, the steady thread that is taking place. So I just want to give you some reasons why I think that we should be engaging in understanding the signs of the times. Here's one. The purpose for it is to keep us spiritually awake and alert. Yeah? Matthew 24:42-44 says, watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. You see that word? You do not expect. So if you do not expect something, it can catch you up unguarded and unprepared. Then a statement says in Testimonies for the Church, great changes are soon to take place in our world, and the final movements will be rapid ones. You see, here's another reason, not only to keep us spiritually awake and alert, but to strengthen our faith. You know that when we read of the history of the church and the experiences that these people went through, sometimes we ask our question, what kind of faith those martyrs had? Do we have that kind of faith today, that we can go through what they went through? So our faith needs to be strengthened. And you know, John 14:29 says, and now I have told you before it comes, that when it does come to pass, you may believe. And Desire of Ages made this point. It is not enough to have an intellectual knowledge of the truth. We must know its power upon our own hearts and lives. And then a third reason I want to share with you before we get right into the meat of the presentation is this one. The reason for studying and understanding the signs of the times is to help us recognize deception. Deception. And Jesus warned in Matthew 24, verse 24, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. And testimonies for the church says Satan is constantly seeking to cast his shadow over the people of God, to obscure their spiritual vision and enshroud them in darkness. He will lead them to forget that the coming of the Lord is near. So there are reasons why we need to really study and understand the signs of the times. And I pray that tonight, as we go into this presentation, that we could be encouraged to indeed devote the attention that is needed to be devoted to this very important subject. Let us pray. Father, tonight we want to thank you for the privilege of worship and the opportunity to come to study your word. We know, God, that we are living in serious times and we need to be ready. Indeed, Lord, the enemy of our souls is trying to distract us, and he has caused so many, Lord, to fall away from these truths. But we are thankful, Lord, that you've given us the word, and this word is sure, and by studying it, we can be prepared for your return. So bless us to this end, so that every single individual here in the sanctuary and online will not be caught off guard, but will be ready for that important event that will take place. Now, tonight we're going to be looking at this with the aid of some current events, things that are happening today. I'll be sharing some clips as well, short clips, to provide you with some information that you need to have. All right? Now, if I were to ask the question, how many of you really, not expressing really now, really believe that in this civilized age, right, that there will be a law passed, Sunday laws passed in all countries with persecution following for those persons who fail to adhere to it? How many of you really believe that? All right, so the hands are going up. But you know what? Do you know that there's some persons, though, who have been teaching this for many years, who have come to the conclusion that this is not really going to happen anymore? I mean, when I say some people, I mean some of us. You doubt me? Listen to one such. This is a guy by the name of Reindeer Brucema. I don't know if I pronounce his name right. He's an Adventist theologian. Here's what he has to say. In an article that was posted on the Adventist Today website on December 7th, 2018, Reindeer said, an Adventist theologian, he argues that the Adventist teaching of end-time Sunday laws is becoming increasingly implausible. Sunday laws were being enforced in the United States in Ellen White's day, especially in the southern states during the late 1880s and the early 1890s. But that was then, and this is now. Today, an increasingly secular society wants to do away with Sunday observance altogether. Therefore, Brucema concludes the Adventist mission today needs to change from one that proclaims the imminence of Sunday legislation to one that proclaims the spiritual and physical benefits of Sabbath observance. Brucema also concludes that in light of this development, we need to reevaluate Ellen White's inspiration, though he doesn't make any suggestions about what that revised view might entail. Now, he's using Ellen White because of the great controversy that talks about these situations. But bear in mind, this knowledge about the end precedes the writings of Ellen White by far, long time. The actual reformers all believe that. Have you ever heard of progressive Adventism? You haven't, right? But listen to this one. Within the broader Adventist community, a movement known as progressive Adventism has emerged, characterized by a more open and less dogmatic approach to theology. Progressive Adventists often reinterpret or question traditional doctrines, including the investigative judgment and the role of E.G. White. Regarding the Sabbath, many in this group emphasize its positive aspects for human benefit and are less likely to view Sunday keeping as the mark of the beast, thereby distancing themselves from the traditional emphasis on impending Sunday laws. Who is behind this? Do you think that person just decide one day to get up and say, you know what, this doesn't make sense anymore? The devil is behind this. Because we've been called to give up a certain song, the third angel's message in this time. Come out of her, my people. We are supposed to prepare people for what is coming. So if we can get people decided to move away from that, then we cannot effectively finish that work. And that is a concern that I have. So tonight, we're going to go to some slides, and we're going to talk a bit about this. We want to understand a bit more as to not necessarily the theology, because many of us here have studied it. Many of us know the doctrine. But the issue is how real, how imminent, how certain is it? And that's where the question is that, are you ready? Let's go to our first slide. Now, you know, last week, Elder Ranglin took us through the Revelation 13 as it relates to the first beast. So let me recap briefly to let you know. The first beast, as we've understood from prophecy, represents the papal power. Revelation 13, 1 to 10 describes that beast. And it gives all the descriptions, we heard some of that last week, that pointed to the papacy as being that first beast. The second beast, we understand from also Bible study, to be the United States. Revelation 13, 11 to 18. And you heard that mentioned earlier tonight. Speaks to that. So there are two beasts that are involved in this whole affair. The first beast, the second beast. But behind them all, we know is what? The dragon, who it says he gave power to the first beast. And he continues to give power even to the second beast to enforce and support the work of the first beast. Now, the next slide we're going to look at gives a little bit about what really takes place in regards to this first beast and what they have done. We know they have spoken blasphemies against God. The idea that they can forgive sins, the idea that they represent God on earth, stand in God's place. We know that the papacy, the popes, have said that over and over again. Another point to identify them is that what? Persecutes the saints of God. And there were occasions in the Dark Ages where the gutters ran like water falling from the rain, flowing with blood. Another thing that we know that is said about that first beast is that they will receive a daily wound, but that daily wound is being healed. So these point to the first beast. We're not going in a study on that. I'm just touching those points so that we can develop further. Now let's look now at the second beast. Let's move on. Now the lamb-like beast that we just saw, here are 3 points about them. First, we know it speaks like a dragon. The devil is a dragon. So he's speaking like a dragon. So he's obviously saying things, although he looks like a lamb, he's still speaking evil and wicked and destructive things as he, does what he's supposed to be doing from the perspective of Satan's work. But not only that, it says he exercises power of the first beast. So if the first beast was the papacy, this second beast is also gaining and doing things that the first beast did. Now, the first beast, as we saw earlier, persecuted the saints in the Dark Ages. So the second beast, exercising that same power, is also persecuting power. And this one is the key one. This third point, note what it says, enforces the mark of the beast. Now, understand this. While the mark of the beast comes directly from the work of the first beast, the papacy, the enforcement of that is through the second beast. Is United States important? Or is United States just another country? United States has a very serious role in the very thing that we're discussing tonight, the mark of the beast, Sunday worship. We're going to look to the next slide. Let me make sure that you understand clearly what this is. Now, some people think that the mark of the beast is a tattoo or a stamp, 666 in your forehead. Some people think it's a barcode. Some people think it's a chip. People have come up with all kinds of things that they thought the mark of the beast was. We know that the mark of the beast is neither of those things. The mark of the beast is not a physical mark, but enforced Sunday worship. On the contrast, though, the mark of the beast is contrasted to the seal of God. And the seal of God from Scripture is what? Sabbath observance. So you're either observing the Sabbath based on prophecy, or you are observing a false mark, which is Sunday observance. Now, question, has anybody received the mark? Is there anybody existing today who have received the mark of the beast? No. So make sure that you, in your discussions on this, never give an impression to any person that they, because of the way they worship, that they have got the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast will only be effected when rules and laws are legislated, determining that men must make a choice. So, the next slide, the coming crisis, therefore, will force people to choose between obeying man-made laws or God's law. And by the way, there's no fence. You can't sit on the fence. You're either one side or the other. Now, this idea of Sunday worship and Sunday laws is a very interesting thing. This next slide talks about laws that restrict activities on Sundays. Now, I don't know if you know that there are certain places where certain things can't be done on Sundays, even today. We're going to go into that some more. Another point, these were initially enforced, these laws were initially enforced for labor and environmental rest. Now, guess what they were called? Blue laws. They were called blue laws. And these were established to restrict activities on Sunday and to enforce labor and environmental rest. Isn't that a good thing, to have rest? Certainly. The problem comes when you believe that you must dictate it and legislate it. Ultimately, enforced for religious rest and worship, but they are present still today in various US states. Now let's look at some. Let's look at this slide. Now these are actual clips, paper clippings. This one talks about Sunday laws enforced in the province of Ontario. That was way back when. There's another one says that plain blue law for Washington. And at the bottom, no ifs and ands or buts concerning enforcement of Sunday blue law. Now, if it has happened before, it can happen again. Now, some people think that because we live in a civilized world, that these things are archaic. But you can be surprised tonight. I want you now to watch this short clip, because this is a wake-up call to show to you how close we came in 1888 to Sunday law being passed. And I want you to listen to the language and who defended it at that point in time. All right? Press and let's get this clip.
In May of 1888, Senator Henry Blair of New Hampshire proposed legislation to limit secular activities on Sundays within the jurisdiction of the United States federal government. Senator Blair made it clear that the aim of his bill was to preserve the first day of the week as a day of rest and religious observance. The bill was referred to the Senate Committee on Education and Labor, where Blair was chairman. Among those who raised objections to the proposed legislation was Alonzo T. Jones.
Sir, you may speak of the power of a majority in social and civil matters, but there is no majority, however large, that can invade the territory of a man's religion. Not in this land, not under our Constitution.
Mr. Jones, you fail to recognize the right, or more importantly, the responsibility of the state to protect the welfare of the people as a whole.
Senator, it seems that you fail to recognize the clear distinction between man's responsibility to the state and his duty toward God. The first, he must render under the force of law. The second, duty to God, must be carried out only under the force of love, and that freely, voluntarily. No law can command love.
But the law of the state must protect the people to carry out their duty to God. Our Sunday law is written to ensure the preservation of the Lord's Day for the benefit of the people.
An admirable goal, Senator Blair, but completely unnecessary. Our Constitution already recognizes the rights of the people with respect to their religion. Your Sunday law would add nothing to our fundamental freedoms. It would rather add restrictions.
I'm afraid, sir, that you are blind to the realities of our age. If men owe a duty to God and do not willingly perform it, they become a corrupting influence in society.
This proposed Sunday law would have a corrupting influence by introducing force and coercion into its observance.
On the contrary, the intended effect is to enhance the Sabbath. If men do not consent to honor the Lord's Day, if their actions on that day are unrestrained by civil law, excuse me, then they trample on the very rights of those who would honor and observe the day as holy unto the Lord.
With all due respect, Senator, can you not see that your Sunday bill proposes to trample on the rights of the religious minorities? Do you really want to revert to those dark ages where church and state united to force men to violate their conscience and conform to an officially established religion?
Now, that is an unworthy comparison, sir. Our Sunday law is for the ultimate benefit of the whole society. Is it not a legitimate function of the state to legislate on behalf of the common good?
The common good of which you value so highly is not served by restricting the rights of one man's conscience in order to enlarge the rights of another. It is best served by the freedoms upon which this republic was established. State-sponsored religious coercion defies the clear intent of the founding fathers.
But this law provides an exemption for those who wish to worship on another day. Jews, Seventh-day Baptists, your Seventh-day Adventists, for example, who observe Saturday as the Sabbath. So where's the problem?
The problem is,
Why, just this morning, a Mrs. Baden of the Women's Christian Temperance Union addressed this committee in support of such an exemption. She has conferred with representatives of 9 different groups who observe Saturday rather than Sunday, and you know how many of those approved the exemption? All of them. Every single one.
Senator, I have great respect for the temperance principles promoted by Mrs. Batum's organization, but she does not speak for my denomination on the question of exemptions.
Come now, Professor Jones, are you about to object to exemptions that would certainly benefit your group and several others?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, we do object. An exemption clause would not change the proposed law so as to modify our opposition. Here is the principle, Senator. If the law were just and perfect, an exemption would not be necessary. Another thing, an exemption clause is nothing other than a toleration clause in disguise. Toleration is not liberty. It is merely a form of condescension, the majority putting up with the opinions and convictions of the minority. Our Constitution guarantees not tolerance, but rights, and we claim those rights as American citizens.
Mr. Jones, without yielding the point, let me move to another question. How would you react if we would rewrite this bill as a Saturday law, with Saturday as the Sabbath, not Sunday at all? I suppose you would take a very different position.
To the contrary, Senator, all laws that attempt to force the conscience are manifestly unchristian and unconstitutional by their very nature. Therefore, Senator, we are against every Sunday law that has ever been made since the first one enacted by Constantine to the one you are proposing now. And if you changed it from a Sunday law to a Saturday law, we would oppose it just as firmly.
Senator Blair's bill never made it out of committee, but there were already plenty of other Sunday laws, which are commonly called blue laws. In fact, in America today, 49 of the 50 states have laws protecting Sunday. Alaska is the only exception.
Right. Now, I want you to understand that that is not just a fiction, right? That actually occurred. Now, do you think that when a lot of people also think that the law is just going to appear like that? Understand that that is going to be discussed and debated in the political arena. Just like how they debate issues today, you'll be hearing it on the news, you'll be seeing the people talking about it, discussing it. But this one didn't pass. But you know, a time will come where the discussion will get the majority vote. And once it gets the majority vote, you know it is going to pass. Now, as we move on, listen to this statement by the inspiration. The Sunday movement. Let me bring back up my own thing here so you can see a little better. All right. The Sunday movement is now making its way in darkness. The leaders are concealing the true issue. And many who unite in the movement do not themselves see whether the undercurrent is tending. They are working in blindness. She further says, they do not see that if a Protestant government sacrifices the principles that have made them a free, independent nation, and through legislation brings into the Constitution principles that will propagate papal falsehood and papal delusion, they are plunging into the Roman horrors of the Dark Ages. She said that these things are taking place now. She was writing so far back. If they were taking place now, under concealment, under guise, what is happening today? That's a big question. As they look to the next slide, here's how this thing is going to develop. All right, here's some steps. Steps to the Sunday law. First, voluntary Sunday observance encouraged. All right, no force, voluntary. You got an option, we're encouraging you, all right, to go to church and to stop doing certain things on that day. Second, economic pressures for compliance. Economic pressures for compliance. This rings a bell. Economic pressures for compliance. What bell does that ring to you? It sounds real familiar. Was it there some kind of economic pressures being put on people a few years ago? You know what I'm talking about? Anybody knows what I'm talking about? COVID. You got to comply. Because if you don't comply, if you don't take the jab, then you're in trouble. You know how many people lost their jobs as a result? You know how many people lost income and all kind of thing, closed job, businesses shut down and all kind of thing? To me, that was a test run. And third, legal enforcement and persecution of Sabbath keepers. Folks, this is where a lot of people will get caught, because they figured by reading about the Sunday law and persecution, that all of a sudden, somebody gonna rush through this door where we're worshiping at church, out in the blue, and start telling people, stop worshiping with guns. No. You see these civilized where we're talking about? Things go through certain channels, and there'll be debates and discussion. But they're gonna start easy, and gradually you're gonna reach the point where it is enforced through legal pressure. And therefore, there'd be a movement advocating Christian nationalism. Now, Christian nationalism is where Christian organizations join their hands with the political arena to try to force them to adhere to Christian principles. Now, you might say that is a good thing. Suppose the churches in Barbados decide one day to look to Mia Motley and the government and says, look, we are Christians, and God did a Christian society. And we want to insist that the people that in power observe certain Christian principles. And we're going to put them in power to do that. And they're pushing in the political arena. That is Christian nationalism. That is going on today. Push for traditional values, including Sunday observance, and then potential for future legislative action. If you've been reading the news, especially since the election, you'd have heard a lot about something I'm going to talk about a little bit. But it is where they were intent to make sure that the person who was in power was representing the cause of all Christians. So you see things like homosexuality? That's not good. We don't want that. So therefore, you got to make sure that when you get into power, that you abolish that. You put pressure on that. And one might say, well, that's a good thing. But you see, a lot of people don't see where it's leading. Right? Why is a good thing? When Christians put their hands in politics and try to demand things on the name of Christ, that's a dangerous thing. because the Bible talks about what church and state should remain what? Separate. Church and state must always remain separate. And so, let's talk about something called Project 2025. How many of you have heard about that term? Raise your hand if you've heard the term Project 2025. Which year are we living in? 2025, of course, obviously. When was this Project 2025 established? In 2025? No, before 2025. Because there was an election coming up. And the intention was to ensure that the person, whoever is in power, understands clearly that these are the things that we are insisting that must take place. Project 2025, what is it? All right, I want you to hear about this. Because if you don't understand that we are living
they're
in
taking
a serious age, this should wake you up. All right, let's run this one.
they're taking a plan here that in the first 180 days of office, they want to implement this plan. So this is something that's going to be very rapid. Part of their fourth pillar is actually to implement a sort of religious element to this, that whatever the president says, in God we trust, or you know, a reference to divine authority there, that they can go ahead and try and implement as part of one of the pillars of this project. Sohrab Omari, writing for Deseret News, he was asked the question, would you support restored Sabbath laws and more broadly public activism towards policies of this nature? He says, that's my jam, man, definitely. He used to be the editor for the New York Post, a co-op ed. And so we're seeing this idea of Sabbath laws becoming much more prevalent today. This is from Jonathan Berry, who was the editor for Chapter 16 of Project 2025, which talked about the Sabbath.
But there are implications for social conservative values across many issues. One of the interesting proposals that you've laid out in Project 2025 handbook from Heritage is stuff around the Sabbath. Mm-hmm. What are some of the ideas that you have there?
Yes. So this is, it sounds controversial. Mm-hmm. In many respects, it is a return to something that basically always everyone ever had. Mm-hmm. And it's specifically the idea of encouraging Sabbath rest through discouraging commerce on the Sabbath. The proposal that's in our book is amending the basic federal overtime law, Fair Labor Standards Act, to require that overtime be paid for all work done on the Sabbath.
Interesting.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't think I don't think Congress has the authority to mandate like a national closing on the Sabbath. That was always a state decision to do that. But let me add, it was always a state decision to do that.
They did it.
and yeah, I'm not saying this practice was uniform, homogeneous, whatever, but very, very widely spread, and only recently in the last few decades have most states moved away from this. So this is, I think this is about as far as the federal government could properly go in this space, but it would be an encouragement and inducement to rest, but really to kind of coordinate commercial activity for the other 6 days of the week, which is as long as we've had Sabbatarian civilization, beginning in Israel and continuing into Christendom. This is something that's been increasingly a part of the rhythm of civic life. Most importantly, for people to have space to worship and honor God, and secondly, to have times of communal rest with their families and with their communities.
These guys aren't alone. I've got a few more clips here I was going to show you. This is Dr. Chad Pecknold from the Catholic University of America, and he says it a little bit more explicitly.
So here I want to propose, as a bulwark, as a make-weight, as a condition for addressing material questions in a non-materialist way, a public orientation to God then reflected where? Reflected in concrete ways, in national holidays, in civic liturgies, in laws, indeed, Sabbath laws, Sunday laws that would require a cessation of what? Commerce.
So how do you order people, how do you order Christians to eternal life? Well, you, in an outward way, you do what you can so that they can worship God and the church can administer word and sacrament. And how, in particular, how would you do that? You'd have Sabbath laws, and Sabbath laws are not simply to punish violations of fourth commandment, but to provide the conditions in which people can worship God without distraction. That's the purpose.
That make it sound so good.
Yeah, but he takes it a little bit farther.
The best critique is basically that what you're doing is it's a de facto privileging of Christianity, because which religion has the Sabbath on Sunday? Well, it's Christianity, and so you're not doing it on Saturday. You're not doing it. So you're explicitly saying this is a Christian land, and we're going to force you to obey some sort of Christian. And so that's the best critique. And I would just say, yeah, well, that's exactly what it does. I would just one of those things. I'm not going to reject their objection. I'm just going to affirm it. Yes.
One of the individuals referenced here is actually Sohrab Ahmari. He's the editor of the New York Post, and
So the Wall Street Journal.
Yes, Wall Street Journal. What we've lost in rejecting the Sabbath. And they talked here about how we need to kind of return to this idea of Sunday being protected by rest. But, even businesses of today, like Bed Bath & Beyond, are referencing the idea of Sunday relaxation in some of their ads. You have this being a talking point, not only for the Wall Street Journal, but for Deseret News. It's interesting that during COVID, this was a talking point that I saw to the tune of probably 500 plus articles that I was seeing in various languages around the world, where you're seeing in many countries, you see a push this direction. We can see this in Puerto Rico. We can see this in the United States. Even some Baptist speakers are pushing for Sunday as a day of rest. The idea of Piggly Wiggly perhaps following the Chick-fil-A standard.
Wow.
And, it comes from countries that you wouldn't necessarily expect. For example, Malaysia. In Malaysian news, Hannah Yeoh, who's one of the Malaysian politicians, was stating that Sunday should be made a day of rest and family day.
So they just kind of promote it as family day, not a worship day.
Yeah. You see it in Taiwan as well. There's petitions being put out there that there's a right or rest day or day off once a week. Samoa, you see a push for that as well, that they want to ban Sunday trading. And some, here in the United States, we see how individuals like Adrian Vermeule, who again, he's Donald Trump's appointee to the Administrative Conference, we can see him retweeting ideas from Sohrab Ahmari and others that blue laws are very pro-worker and pro-family. So unions specifically are some of the main driving power players to get these enacted. And of course, this has been very popular in Germany, where Sundays on the construction site, there were some individuals that broke the basic law, Article 139 of the Bundesrepublik Deutschland, and they were fined 1,200 euros.
Wait,
So-
they were fined for what? If they worked on Sunday?
Yeah, exactly. Wow. And, in Germany, of course, the unions right there have been really big in getting these enacted. You got the Verdi Union, you've got Uni Europa, you've got CESI, several different trade unions that are headed this direction and advocating before the members of European Parliament. Of course, during COVID, we saw people being booked in certain regions of India for violating Sunday lockdowns. The Mississippi governor declared Sunday a statewide day of fasting and prayer.
Oh.
Of course, Matthew McConaughey, it's getting very popular in Hollywood as well, in certain sectors. And in France, the idea of a Lord's Day Act that was previously nullified by the Supreme Court, there was a petition that was delivered to the French National Assembly to get that federal Lord's Day Act reenacted in Quebec. So it's getting super popular.
Yeah, this is worldwide.
There's more on the Puerto Rico Sunday closures as well. We have closures being pushed in Italy. We see, of course, in China, a hefty fine. This was actually over in Greece. There was a butcher who opened his shop on Sunday, and he had to pay 3,000 euros.
It's crazy.
So, yeah. So one of the things that I found interesting here, though, is in the United States, there was a newspaper called the Union Springs Herald, and this particular section right here, I found interesting. They stated that, you know, the Sunday Blue laws are not unconstitutional or discriminatory, and this opens a way for the present confused, contradictory local and state laws to be replaced by a national law that will standardize the enforcement of Sunday Blue laws all over America.
Oh.
So they want something federal here, closing all across Europe, and you can see over in some of the movements that are gathering to enact Sunday laws that it's coming together of, you know, federations of trade unions, churches, bankers, so financial structure here getting on board. And you can see how, you know, the environmentalists like Green Party Switzerland and a lot of unions, the Methodist Church, everybody's coming together and trying to head this direction.
Right, so you would have seen and heard mentioned places all over the world. You see how widespread it is? And you realize that all this is discussion that's going on when? No. So the idea that this is something that is way down the line or might not even happen is something that we have to start rethinking. And certainly there's no question, there's no doubt whatsoever that these are realities that are taking place in our world as we speak. Now, what I want to do is go to some encouraging words that we have as we think about what is taking place. Because there is indeed the certainty that it will happen. The question was, are you ready? What is it that you're ready for? That's the question. Are you ready? Are you ready to be able to bear economic challenges, restrictions upon your family and your freedoms at the risk of being persecuted? Are you prepared for that? There will indeed be a period following these laws where we will have to make some decisions. And I'm going to go to this slide. So just go to this slide where we have some encouraging words from Ellen White. Not that one, go forward.
A bill.
In fact, that slide that I'm going to skip is actually a bill that was debated in 2025, a Sunday law bill that was debated in Oregon. In other words, some politician brought a Sunday law bill for discussion and to get it passed. So that only goes to show you how current this thing is. It didn't get through, right? But the fact that it is happening tells you that it's around the corner. But notice this statement. As the defenders of truth refuse to honor the Sabbath, the Sunday Sabbath, some of them will be thrust into prison, some will be exiled, some will be treated as slaves. Great controversy. Those who are true to God will be menaced, denounced, proscribed. They will be betrayed both by parents and brethren and kinfolks and friends, even unto death. We are not to have the courage, and I like this statement, we are not to have the courage and fortitude of martyrs of old until, note this, until brought into the position they were in. Should there be a return of persecution, there be grace given to arouse every energy of the soul to show a true heroism. Now, I want to listen to that. It says, when that time comes, grace is going to be given that would allow us to be able to go through. Some of us sit here today and we care, we shudder, we fear, and we ask ourselves, can I stand? Will I be able to stand during this time? But this is saying we are not to be burdening ourselves right now with that. If we are faithful to God, we have a relationship with Christ, the promise is that when we are tested, but remember, it must be persons who have a relationship. You can't be playing church, in other words. You can't be caught up with secularism and all these secular things, and then expect all of a sudden on a day like this to be able to have that grace and power to stand. But if you have the relationship, the promise is there that you will be able to stand. God will ensure that. So the disciples were not endowed with the courage and fortitude of the martyrs until such grace was needed. In the time of trouble, just before the coming of Christ, the righteous will be preserved through the ministration of heavenly angels. The people of God will not be free from suffering, but while persecuted and distressed, while they endure privation and suffer for want of food, they will not be left to perish. God will not suffer the wicked to destroy those who were expecting translation and who would not bow to the decree of the beast or receive his mark. I saw that if the wicked were permitted to slay the saints, Satan and all his evil hosts and all who hate God would be gratified. So there'll be a period called the early time of trouble and the major time of trouble. Indeed, in the early time of trouble, there will be some folk who will lost their lives. But in the time of trouble, that latter part of trouble, it says that we'll be protected. So I want to encourage and challenge all of us to not be like ostrich and put our head in the sand and pacify yourself with the thought that this is not going to happen because you fear it. There is enough evidence that points to the fact that today it is already being discussed and prepared. We don't know. We can't say when, but we know that these things are already taking place and being planned. It is for us to have that relationship with Christ, have a true, sincere relationship with Christ. If you're playing church, it's time to stop. If you're not in our devotions, if you're not taking worship seriously, it is time to get back on target with Christ. Because the truth is, anytime now, we could be forced to make a decision. And I pray that we will all be able to make the decision that counts, a decision for Christ, even if it meant loss of economic privileges, and our life being threatened. Bow with me as we have a word of prayer. Almighty God, for years we've been hearing and studying and reading about the eminent national Sunday law. Father, it isn't something that we would say that we want to see happen. Nobody wants to be persecuted. But there are prophecies will come true. And you want us, Lord, to be able to understand and apply our lives so that when it does happen, that we are ready. Help us to form that relationship with you and build it and make it strong. Help increase our faith, because we know there will be many persons, Lord, who will give in, even among our brethren, even among our family. But you want us to be strong and be faithful to the end. And I pray that everyone here online and those in the sanctuary and many others would decide to get serious with Christ, so that when these things begin to unfold and unfold rapidly, that they would be able to stand. Because at the end of it all, we have that eternal rest with you that is promised to all who remain faithful. Bless us to this end. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.